Hello and welcome back to the ADHD Goals podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode because you may have noticed in the past couple of weeks, I've been putting out some shorter bite-sized episodes on topics that sort of just relate to how certain things affect ADHD or certain things that can help us manage ADHD. But they were all individual bite-sized episodes, and they didn't really necessarily relate to how I want to put them all together into a coaching program. And when I talk about a coaching program, I'm talking about personal training in terms of obviously trying to be fitter and healthier. But as fitness, movement, exercise is all a crucial part of increasing our dopamine levels, exercise and fitness is essentially a really important part of trying to manage our ADHD. So alongside a fitness program, I want to use some of that information to help us understand why it's difficult for us to maintain any type of goal, whether it be a fitness goal or any other life goal that we're trying to achieve. I want to look at how our ADHD can sometimes end up getting in the way, causing us to procrastinate or feel unmotivated. So today I'm going to try and keep it quite visual with some props to talk about the theory side of stuff and then talk about how we can overcome some of the challenges. So with that said, this is going to be quite a visual episode, which understandably, if you're listening to this in the podcast version in audio, then you may be interested to know that I am recording this video as well, and it will be up on YouTube. So I will put a link to the YouTube video in the show notes so that you can jump on over to there. It is available on Spotify video as well, but that if you don't listen on Spotify, then I'm not going to know that. So let's get started. Now, if you've been listening to the episodes that I was talking about, you may know that I mentioned a couple of books. There was Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and there was Professor Stephen Peters' The Chimp Paradox. And both those books essentially talk about the two systems involved in thinking and decision making. There are more, the brain is more complex than that, and there is more to it than that. But essentially, for how we want to understand managing ADHD, we want to make it really simple so that when we're facing particular challenges, we can sort of reach out and grab a simple bit of information to help us understand and frame the problem correctly, and then move forward or understand how we can move forward. So I mentioned the two systems of thinking. I'm going to write those down on some sticky notes. System 1. Now, system 1 is essentially the part of the brain that is the oldest part of the brain. We've inherited these from our evolutionary ancestors. So we share this part of the brain with primates, chimpanzees, that sort of thing. Essentially, this is all people might call it the reptilian brain. It's the part of the brain that deals with instinctual behaviour. So if you feel that you're in danger, it's the fight and flight mode. But also there is a particular advantage to the system 1 because it also deals with habitual thought processes. So if you're doing activities that you've learned and you're very experienced in over time, you'll notice that you'll probably say to yourself, I wasn't really thinking when I was doing that. That's because the system 1 has a kind of power saving mode. It's remembered how to do it sort of instinctually, and it can do it without draining our sort of cognitive juices from our system 2. So let's write system 2 down. Now, I am going to move away from calling them system 1 and 2 because that isn't going to make much sense after a while. So system 2 is the brain that we as humans have evolved over time, and this deals with rational thought, so figuring out problems and also planning ahead, this sort of thing. It's also where we have our executive functions as well, which we can talk about in a bit, because obviously people with ADHD have challenges with executive functions, etc. But like I said, so a good example of understanding how system one and system two work together. Imagine if you are learning to drive. Now, learning to drive at the point where you are learning, it's a new behavior. It requires a lot of energy, cognitive energy, to think about what it is that you're doing. You've got to think about which foot you've got to press for the pedal, when, in what order. You've got to be aware of the space around you. You've got to think about what the rules are, what the laws are, what's right and what's wrong. You've got to understand, your distance perception. All these things are new to you, and therefore it's requiring the heavy lifting of system two to do that. Now, after a while, after you've been driving for some time, you'll notice that you probably, do a 2-hour car journey and you've been on the motorway and you haven't really thought about driving at all, because it's a learned behavior that you have now transferred over to system one. And the brain likes to save energy. The human body likes to save energy because the brain is a huge energy sap. And so anything that it can turn into a habit, it will do so. And then system one will take over. Those are the benefits of system one. Now, let's start using props. So as we said, system two it deals with our rational thinking. Now, system two has a slight flaw in as much as it takes a lot more processing power. And over the day, you only have a certain amount of energy to use up with your system two, a bit like a bucket. So I'm using a flower pot, but we can imagine in our metaphor that this is a bucket that at the beginning of the day, providing that we've had a nice amount of sleep and we've slept well, then that's going to be at its highest in the morning. And, if we're eating well, etc., and rested, we're going to have a nice full bucket of cognitive energy, thinking power in the morning. But over the day, the more decisions that we make, the more challenging thought processes that we have to do. So in our case, if we're doing a lot of executive functions or things that we don't enjoy doing, it's going to drain our bucket, and it's going to be harder to stay in system two thinking as the day goes on. Now, we talked about Stephen Peters talking about the chimp as being our system one. So there's there's a number of reasons why that is a good metaphor, because we share this type of system with our, I'm struggling to keep the chimp upright. We share this with our evolutionary ancestors, but you can imagine a chimp as being, if you had a chimp as a friend, which I'm sure you've all imagined before, you can imagine that it's probably going to be a bit restless, excitable, might be a bit emotional, and misbehave from time to time. A cheeky chimp. Okay, that's a useful way of thinking about a cheeky chimp, and that is essentially how I'm going to look at this through the lens of ADHD. It's looking for fun. It's getting distracted quite easily. It's also quite powerful and strong, and it can be quite emotional. If you threaten it, it feels threatened in any way, it is going to sort of have a bit of it's going to show you that it's going to fight in order to protect itself. And so I'm going to use another little analogy here to give you an example of what that might look like. So if you are a parent, then I'm sure you'll understand what I'm going to say next. If you're not, then hopefully you'll be able to understand it anyway. But if you've ever taken your child on a day trip. Now, let's say that you've got to go and take a train, somebody, or a long car journey. You're going on a day trip. It requires a long journey. And then, as the parent that, the day out, the goal in the end is to have a lovely fun day out of wherever it is that you're going to. But the child doesn't always see it, the end goal, the purpose. The child is in the moment, and if that journey drags on a little bit, it gets too long, they're going to start questioning: Are we nearly there yet? Are we nearly there yet? And over the course of the day, they're going to get thirsty. They're going to get hungry. They're going to get tired. They may start to get a bit bored. And all this is going to lead to a restless child who's getting more and more aggravated and upset. And then at some point, you can begin to expect that at some point during that day, that child, because it's overtired, it's frustrated, it's bored, it's hungry, it's thirsty, is going to have a meltdown. And you, as the parent, can then sort of say, "Oh, stop it! We're supposed to be having a nice time. Look at where we're going, what we're trying to do." You can see the big picture, the benefit of why you're doing it, but the child can't necessarily see the same picture as you. All it knows is that it feels uncomfortable, bored, scared, agitated, whatever. And then the result is that you get upset with your child. You may shout at the child. The child's going to get more upset, and it's not really going to solve any problems. And when you reflect on that the next day, you might think, "Oh, we're never going to try this again. This is just too much hassle. I have to wait until you're older before we can have nice days out." And that's not helpful, because at the end of the day, everybody likes, whatever that day trip was, whether it's a day out to the fun fair or something like that, theme park. We want to have that experience to have a nice and happy life. Now, one thing that we could do, there's another way of thinking about this. Instead of giving up and saying we're never going to try that again, we, as the parent, can say, well, what went wrong then? Why did that happen? And the next time we plan a trip, we can take an emergency backpack with us. And in that backpack, we might pack with us a bottle of water, some snacks, and maybe some activity books, some coloring books, reading book, or some toys. So that way we know that at some point, the child's going to get thirsty. We've got some water. The child's going to get hungry. We've got some snacks. The child's going to get bored. We've got some coloring books, reading book, or toys, etc. So we're trying our best to predict what is going to go wrong and bring with us a set of tools to help us cope with those problems. And all we can do is essentially try and reassure the child that, although they can't picture where we're going to be, or, that if we go through this long journey, we will have a happy time at the end of it. We can try and reduce the stress and anxiety of getting there. So in that scenario, as the parent, packing an emergency backpack for the child to reassure the child, to give us some tools to cope, we have essentially designed a solution for the problem. So the way I want to think about our system too, so I'm adding some spectacles there, some very designery glasses there to our bucket, because our system too, its job is to be the designer, and it needs to design a solution for our spectacles have fallen off, for our chimp, our child. Now, I'm going to change the chimp there for, this is a sloth, because sloth, quite slow, or some people might say lazy. I'm not saying that ADHD is laziness. Please do not confuse that. But what I'm saying is, in terms of procrastination, okay, I think the sloth is quite a good metaphor for that. So essentially, system one, our sloth, it's our procrastinator. We are attending whenever we are finding ourselves struggling with procrastination, not being able to move, not being able to start. It's essentially because our system one is in charge at that time, and it's just kind of it's preventing us from moving, preventing us from starting. There are good reasons for that. As I was saying in the sort of the chimp analogy, it's when it gets emotionally aggravated, it's scared of what the outcomes might be. Now, obviously, before we evolved, or as in prehistoric times, we would have been hunter gatherers. So it would be a very useful function to have a rather active system one, because we're constantly being threatened in the environment that we're in, that we might need to fight or flight. Now, in today's modern age, we're not necessarily under the same amount of the same sort of threats. The threats that we're more likely to face are, when we're in our day jobs, our status, how we appear to our peers. And if you are worried about imposter syndrome, or, worried that something won't be perfect, these are all things that will light up your system one as being a threatening situation. And it may well freeze and not want to do anything. That's your procrastination, our sloth here. Or it may get emotional and lash out and say things that it regrets later. Now, another thing that I want to talk about in terms of the separate systems and parking our unwanted traits here in the system one, I think it allows us to separate some of those unwanted traits or challenges that we have as not necessarily having to be part of what we make up as our understanding of ourselves, our personality, our value, etc. It's easy to think, after sort of, if you've had a challenging day, you've not done anything, or you've lashed out at somebody, it's easy to beat yourself up. And then the more times that happens over your life, so especially if you've been diagnosed with ADHD later on in life and you've not understood why that is happening, then it's easy to have wrapped up all of those less positive traits into a perception of yourself that says you're not able to do things, you will not achieve anything, you will always procrastinate. And essentially, by separating those two systems out, understanding that when one is active and the other one is not, that you're more likely to act in a certain way when system one is in charge than to system two. Our chimp, our sloth, or our bucket, our designer. And so what our goal here is, there's a few goals. Essentially, we want to find ways in which we can protect the water in our bucket, stop it from leaking as much as it can. So that might be, start here. There are a number of goals here that we want to try and achieve over time. Is that we want to find ways of protecting the leaks or fixing the leaks in our bucket. We need to understand, we're not going to completely stop our bucket from leaking. It's natural. It goes down naturally over the day. So, but what we want to try and do is we want to top it up as much as possible by getting good sleep, eating well, topping it up with good exercise, that sort of thing. And we want to maybe reduce the workload on it by maybe reducing the amount of unnecessary decisions that we make each day. So we need it to do, executive functions or rational thinking during the day. But there are probably a number of decisions that you make every day that it's the same sort of decisions each day. And probably you could cut those out by saving yourself some time. It could be, what to eat today. If you plan that out in one go for the whole week, and you don't give yourself the decision of what you're going to eat each day. You're reducing the cognitive function of making those decisions. I think it was Steve Jobs would wear the same outfit all the time. I think there's a story about Obama also wearing the same or having the choice of two suits or two ties or something, so that he didn't need to waste any energy thinking about those decisions that aren't necessarily important, but still reduce the amount of energy we've got in our bucket. So top it up. We need to top it up as best we can, and we need to stop it leaking as much as we can. So those are two scenarios that we want to design solutions for. And when we come to our system one, our chimp, sloth, our procrastinator, essentially we want to understand that this guy is going to be in charge at some point. This guy is going to take over, and it's going to be good for when we're doing habitual stuff. It means that we're in power saving mode. But if it is in charge when we get round to doing some important things that are going to get us closer to the goals that we want to achieve, if it's in charge and it says, I don't think we're going to come out of this too well, we might not do it properly. We're going to show how incompetent we are to people. That sounds scary to me. I'd like to sit on the sofa. I'd like to actually get some dopamine from that. The sweet food, the chocolate in the fridge. I want to open a can of beer and forget about this. That's the sort of thing that can happen where we sit in our procrastination pit. My procrastination pit is my sofa. When I'm trying to achieve, whether it's be a side project or something, after a day's work, I think I'm going to get home and I'm going to work on that side project. But by the time I've traveled home, I'm tired. I'm completely out of juice. My bucket's empty. My chimp, my procrastinator, it just says, let's sit on the sofa. Let's get some dopamine from flicking on the TV, clicking next episode. Let's scroll on through our social media. Let's get all that bad dopamine from wherever we can find it. It keeps us entertained and sort of happy in that sense, but we're not getting closer to what we know is going to make our overall life better. So that brings us on to another topic. Dopamine is essential to preventing us from switching so easily. People with ADHD have more an overactive compared to neurotypical people. People with ADHD, we have a more overactive system one. We are more likely to switch to system one more often throughout the day because of the dopamine deficiency. The lack of dopamine that we have means that we are looking for interest, intrigue, excitement, and we're switching to system one more often. So those are things that we are going to struggle with. So we have to try and top up our bucket with as much healthy, good dopamine as we can. Dopamine that lasts longer over a longer period of time, as opposed to short, quick shots of dopamine. So that's a topic really that I want to address. There is a dopamine baseline, a general dopamine baseline that we have And that is generally where our baseline is how likely our system 2 bucket is going to be when we recharge over time. Now, over time, we can increase that baseline to give ourselves a higher dopamine baseline. But one thing that people mistakenly do is they think, oh, I've got ADHD, it's a lack of dopamine. Therefore, I'm going to just get as many hits of dopamine as I can because that's going to allow me to concentrate better. That is not necessarily the case. I referred to in the previous episodes that one of those, the one on dopamine, that the Huberman lab, Dr. Huberman, he talks about stacking or spikes in dopamine. Whenever you have a large hit of dopamine or you stack dopamine intakes one on top of the other, you have this huge spike in dopamine. And if you've ever given a child one of those sugary drinks, you'll know that they'll get really hyperactive. And then what comes after the hyperactive spike? They have a huge crash and a meltdown. And so if you go about your day thinking that the best thing to improve your concentration is to have huge dopamine spikes, then what you'll find out is that those crashes are actually deeper than the high peak of dopamine that you got in the first place. And that will lower your overall baseline over time, meaning that it's really hard for you to stay in this system 2, our designer system brain thought process. Okay. So the answer to that then is to have throughout the day a steady release of dopamine. So looking for good dopamine sources. That list of things is cold exposure. So cold shower, it's sunlight, morning sunlight at the very start of the day, the sunrise. If you can get out for a walk in that, that'll be great for you. And the exercise is also great as well. If you can get those in the morning, then those are slow release dopamine sources, and that will be better than all the other bad sources of dopamine. I'm not going to go into those bad sources of dopamine now, but scrolling on your phone, watching video after video on YouTube, whatever, alcohol, drugs, that sort of thing, those are all bad for you. Now, coffee is interesting because caffeine, it can be good for how your dopamine receptors work. But again, you don't want to be having huge amounts of caffeine in one go because you will have those spikes. So people say maybe wait for your morning coffee until later on during the day. Allow yourself to have those cold shower or morning sunlight, that sort of thing, some exercise in the morning, and then grab a coffee later on. But obviously not too late, because if you have it in the evening, then you're not going to sleep properly and you're not going to recharge your bucket anyway. So that's covered. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is, so we're trying to protect the water in our bucket. That's one thing. We're trying to make sure that we've got enough dopamine in the system to kind of reduce the amount of switching that goes on. But inevitably, we are going to switch to system 1. And that might be a time where we want to be motivated to do something and it's not helping us. It's not allowing us to do that hard work we need to do to get us towards our goal. And we need ways in which we can flick the switch and switch back to system 2. Now, there are various different ways of doing that. As I said, in the scenario of creating an emergency backpack for the day trip for the child with water and snacks and something entertaining to take with you. That's that's something that we have to premeditate. That's something that we have to prepare for. And that obviously takes time, and that will require some work to figure out what it is that we need to do. But that doesn't help us necessarily unless we have created that solution. We've got that metaphorical emergency backpack prepared, we also need to be able to engage our system to our designer. And we need to switch back to that system. And deep breaths in the moment, if we can do like take 4 deep breaths, that oxygen to the brain can help us switch. It can also help us, you know, I'm not saying necessarily a meditation in that moment is going to help. Maybe doing 12 breaths. Because I often find with meditation, I know that meditation is good for me. It's good for being aware of what is going on inside our bodies and our minds. So the more we do meditate, the more practice we are at understanding which system that we are in, what's going on in our body, what we're feeling. But I often find personally that's just thinking about meditating on a regular basis scares me because we've got overactive minds. The thought of sitting alone with my thoughts, with all those things that I haven't done, that's a scary place to be sometimes. So if you are, I do recommend meditation, but a good meditation to do is a body scan meditation because you're concentrating on different parts of your body as you go through it rather than just sort of allowing thoughts to come in. So that is a good way of getting into the moment, into your body, and switching that system. But like I say, if you have a slight reservation about meditation, if you're trying to pull out a tool from your emergency backpack and it's a full 10-minute, 20-minute meditation, you're going to go, no way, I'm not doing that. So what you can do is take 4 deep breaths. You can maybe extend. Once you take the 4 deep breaths, you can then say to yourself, oh, that wasn't too bad. Because once you start, you tend to find that you can then convince yourself that wasn't too bad. We are reassuring the chimp. We're saying, come on, this isn't so bad. There's a 5-second rule that if you do anything for sort of 5 seconds, you can then start. If you do 5 minutes of something, you can convince yourself to do 5 minutes of something. Then you're more likely to get into that. You switch systems then, and then you are able to continue with the task. It's just convincing yourself to start. So deep breaths can help me start. I found myself in a situation a week or so ago where I'd been away the night before and I was driving back in the morning before I started my day's work. And the car journey had tired me out. And by the time I got home, I went up to my room and I lay on the bed. And then I just thought, I'm going to have a little nap because I'm tired. And I said to myself, that's not good enough. I know I need to get up and I need to start working. So I gradually worked my way through a set of steps. I first convinced myself to take 4 deep breaths. I then, after I had done a bit of a breathing exercise, I said, well, now I'm going to get out of bed. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get in the shower and my shower, I'm very sure this is fortunate for me for this purpose, but my shower takes the best part of a minute to warm up. For everybody else, for my kids, it's a real frustration because nobody likes a cold shower. Nobody in their right mind likes a cold shower. But for this purpose, it is extremely good. You know it's going to get warmer after 45 seconds, so it's fine. You just need to convince yourself to stand under it for 45 seconds in the cold. And another thing that I like to do in order to help reassure my chimp that it's going to be okay, is I put my phone on the top of the shower and I put my hero playlist on. My hero playlist is those songs this is not just songs that I like. These are songs that make me, if you're at a party or a festival with your friends and then you're enjoying yourself, you're dancing to the music, it's fine. you're enjoying yourself. But then there's one of those tunes that come on and you look to your friends and you both got a look in your eyes that says, let's have it. That's a hero playlist song. If you're not at a party or a festival, it's one of those songs that you can put your headphones on, and as you're walking down the street, it makes you strut and you say, yes, I am the Fonz. That's a hero playlist song. And I have a hero playlist that I have on my phone that I put on as I get into that cold shower, switch it on, because it makes me want to move, want to dance. I can't help but want to do that. And I'm fighting through the discomfort of the cold exposure. And then by the time the warm water kicks in, I'm dancing in the shower. And then I'm like, I'm going to attack the day now. I'm the hero in my story, in my whatever, my movie. That's the point of it. And that is my little emergency bag, my emergency backpack for times when I am finding myself in my procrastination pit, not being able to get out of bed, not being able to start something. So having ways in which we can flick the switch from system to system is really useful. And you will have your own triggers that work for you, and understanding what those are is going to be really useful. Now, I've mentioned a few times about reassuring the chimp, our procrastinator, our sloth, about why we're doing this. So when we're in our designer mode, we might be thinking, well, these are all the things that I need to do to achieve this goal. And that's all well and good. When we're in that frame of mind, we can list those things. We can say to ourselves, that's why we're doing it. But we need to reassure our chimp when we're in system one that it's worth doing it. When we're trying to convince ourselves to press that switch, to switch systems, we need to convince our chimp what are we going to achieve here? What's the end result? And we need to be able to build a bit of a story around what we need to be able to visualize, essentially, what that end goal that we're working towards is. We need to remind ourselves what it is that we're going to feel like when we get there. And because we tend to think visually, it's a good idea to actually try and think through those problems when we are in our system two, we're in our design system, our design mode, is to think, this is what it's going to look like when I achieve that goal. And I need to be able to create a little vision board for that so that I can put that around the house or wherever I am likely to be. Maybe it's where your procrastination pit is. Have a little visual reminder. Maybe that's a picture of sort of the type of person that you're trying to be. Someone, if there's somebody that has those skills and traits that you're wanting to achieve in the whatever it is, the job that you're trying to do, or the physique that you're trying to build, or whatever it is, try and create some visual reminders. Remind yourself of what you want to feel when you've achieved that goal, so that we can reassure ourselves when we're in system one. When I reassure our chimp, this is what we're doing it for. Reduce the stress and anxiety that has triggered a system one, and then press the switch and try and do those things that work for you, that get you into system two and able to work. Now, I've mentioned design thinking, and we were just talking about visualizing things there. One of the main challenges for people with ADHD is the executive functions. The executive functioning is challenging. Now, we're not going to be able to change that necessarily. We're not going to be able to, there's nothing that we can necessarily do to change the way our brain processes that. But there are, by there are ways in which we can approach those sort of functions in a way that makes more sense to us. And I'm not going to create a visual example of that here, but essentially by trying to get our thoughts out of, if we're trying to think through a problem in our heads, we keep going around the same issues. We keep listing all the things that we need to do, and they're just in our head and we can't process them necessarily. We can't see the big picture when we're fighting with all those thoughts and creating big long lists in our head. We need to be able to get that out of our heads, and quite literally in the same way, I've got post-it notes here, get each thought out. And so we can move them around and we can begin to sort of take one thought from one place and put it into a visual tool that says, this is how we're going to tackle this problem. Being able to see all of our thoughts in one space and then move them into parts, different sort of visual tools, is really helpful for reassuring us that we're not going to forget about these ones, but we're physically moving one thought from another place in a space that we can see and say, we're now going to tackle this problem now in a certain way. And that is, for me, that's a design thinking process, but it's ways in which we can prioritize things and use visual metaphors to solve problems and to think problems through. So problem solving, breaking tasks, big projects or big problems or challenges or goals down into smaller steps is really key. And we can do that on a whiteboard, on a wall in your house. That's great. But we can have digital versions of, digital whiteboards. I use Miro. You can have a digital version because you can take that around with you whenever you might have a thought or you want to capture an idea. You can put it in there and leave it there until the next time that you sit down and you've saved yourself up for some designer time and trying to work through when we have a lot of energy for our design bucket to process those problems and design solutions for them. I think that is all that I am going to talk about in today's episode. I'm working towards creating a 14-day challenge that, if you are interested in taking part, the 14-day challenge will be looking at how we can create a daily routine that is all about, now, you know how we are with daily routines. We like to think, we would love to be able to have a daily routine. We cover people who are able to get up at the same time, do bam, 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 one thing after the other and get stuff done. We think that's amazing. We would love to be able to do that. We occasionally try it. Maybe once every 3 months, we think, right, I'm going to keep a diet. I'm going to look at my calendar and put everything in my calendar. I was to-do list, blah, blah, blah. We blast out all our to-dos. And we say we're going to do this daily routine. It's all scheduled. 10 minutes to do that, 5 minutes to do that, 3 minutes to do that, an hour to do that. And we overwhelm ourselves. We do it every time. We get into our designer mode and we design everything all in one go. And then we become overwhelmed. That's what we need to work out a better solution for. And the key to that is to create small steps and try and build on a really, really, really easy routine first and get momentum from having some really small set of a small routine. And that routine is all based around getting good dopamine into our system at the right times of day. So the 14-day challenge will be looking at building a morning routine around getting our dopamine in. Once we are able to nail that after a couple of weeks. We take small steps, we take our time. We then look at an afternoon routine and then an evening routine. And then after that, a weekend routine. If we try and do everything at once, it's too much. And if we miss one of the steps and that has a knock-on effect to this, we then get we feel like we've failed and then we just throw it out the window and we stop. So it's really key that we try and take slow, steady steps to creating a routine that is going to help us get the good dopamine into our bodies at the right times of day. And then once we feel that we've got a bit of momentum breeds or feeds motivation. Once we feel like we're winning, we then, our Chimp's on top of the world. It's like, yeah, I'm on board. I like this. And then we find ourselves being more able to do the little tasks. Instead of being a procrastinator, we start finding things to do. And the sense of achievement and well-being follows. So that is what the challenge is going to be all about. And there will be also tools in there about how to visualize things a lot better, visualize our time a bit better, and some problem solving techniques. But if you are interested in doing that challenge, then please, I will put a link to a page where you can sign up for that. It'll be a free 14-day challenge. So yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That feels like I've spoken for quite a while now, but I'm really glad to sort of tie all together what those last couple of weeks posts have been about. The last few weeks episodes have been about tying it all together into a sort of process and concept about how I work. So if you're interested to know more, then please do check the show notes and click the link and sign up for the challenge. Okay. I will see you next time. Bye now.